All right, showing live. I'm going to check X. All right, I'm showing live on X, and let's see if you're showing live here. Yep, looks like we're both showing live, so that's always a good sign. Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday. I'm very excited for today's program. I've got a very intriguing guest. I've been very fascinated by Mr. Evan Amato, and I'm so happy he's been willing to join me today. So feel free to invite some others, and we'll begin here momentarily. Evan, let me ask, what's the weather like in Bergamo?
Well, it was just really strange. I was outside. It was gorgeous, but then it was thundering in the distance. And so it was very ominous. But the sky was divided. It could not make up its mind.
I'm in Ohio, and it's about 70 degrees. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. The sky is blue. It's beautiful. So when we get off this program, I think I'll be running outside for something.
Do it.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on a Memorial Day. Let me kill the music here a little bit. So glad you guys could join us. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Evan Amato. Evan, how are you, sir?
Doing great, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us today. You have a great account on X. That's how I first found out about you. But you have many other outlets that we'll discuss during the show today. But let me say, so you are an expat from the United States. You're living in Italy, and you just have a very kind of unconventional life, if I can say so. And I say that in a positive way. Something I actually admire at this stage of my life. So would you mind just kind of starting off, just to start, what was your upbringing like, and what did you study in school, just kind of like to set you on this path that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, so it all begins in middle school Latin. And basically, really long story, but I'll try to make it short. When I was in middle school, I remember that I had an absolute hatred of Latin, of all things Latin. And so in the first year for sixth grade of Latin class, we had to both study the language, but also study Roman and Greek mythology. And so it was in that class when I was there, I was with a buddy of mine. And basically what we decided to do, because the tests were like half and half, what you were graded on, it was half Latin and half Greek and Roman mythology. And so I said, let's do this. I'll study the myths and you'll study the language. And we'll just, cheat on the test and help each other out. And so that's basically what we did. And it worked phenomenally for a year. My sixth grade self thought that was just a wonderful way to go about things. But then seventh grade came around and I was like, oh, crap, there's no mythology this year. It's literally just the language. Right. I know nothing because I'm a year behind. So the final 2 years of middle school, I essentially got by literally just memorizing entire passages so that if they would say, hey, translate this passage on the test, I'd be like, oh, it's this one. And then I just, go and kind of put that on the paper and recall it from memory. But anyways, all that to say, I graduated and said that, I'm never, ever going to learn another language again. Like I'm done, going to do the bare minimum in high school. And then I'm going to stop with that. And funnily enough, I got into ninth grade Spanish, and for one reason or the other, just completely fell in love with the language. And I don't know I really don't know what it was. I mean, there were different elements to it, but just something about it made it like really, really special. So I fell in love with the language. And a year after that, so my sophomore year of high school, I was like, you know what? I really want to do more with this. I'd see like the cleaning people and I'd try to chat with them in Spanish and like strike up relationships with whomever I can just to have excuses to speak. And I was like, I want to do something with this. And so I tried to find a program to go and study abroad and to learn, in Spain, for example. And
this is when you're in ninth grade?
At this point, 10th. Yeah.
10th grade? Man, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a whole nother level of maturity. That's awesome.
Well, so I tried to go and study this thing and try to
Yeah.
find these programs to go study abroad. They're all a bit too expensive. None of it was really going to work out. And so I was a little bit down because of this. And then one day, this guy walks up to me, this big, like, Colombian footballer, and he says, "Hey, are you the kid who wants to learn Spanish?" I'm like, I'm one of them, I suppose. And he said, "Well, look, I am." He basically said, "Look, I'm friends with a guy who's a principal of a high school in Argentina. You should send him an email and see what happens." Like, what do you mean, see what happens? You should see what happens. And so I email this guy. "Hello, I'm emailing you off the recommendation of this man and seeing what happens." And he basically said, "Oh, well, you should just come down to Argentina for a bit and hang out with us. And, you can live with different families." And so, anyways, to make a story that's becoming long, a little bit shorter, I went down to Argentina, which was my first time ever outside of the country. I have no clue how this, passed the okay check with my parents. Still really like no idea. And went down to Argentina, spent about 3 months or so there, living with
Wow.
different people. Obviously, like, living completely immersed in language, going to school, and all this stuff, and just had the time of my life. I mean, I thought it was incredible. Yeah, I
That's
learned
awesome.
so much, was really immersed, and that's when I just fell in love with language and everything. And
Yeah.
so that was a big eye-opening moment for me, and which kind of planted the seed for everything else that was to come. But later on, when I went to university, I went to actually begin working in the music industry. So I studied part of my time in Nashville. And I got to the point where I was like, oh, you know what? I don't want to ever leave Nashville. Nashville's just amazing. I never want to leave. I don't think I'd be anywhere else in the world except for here. And I said, but you know what? There's this family in Argentina. I've been thinking about them a little bit. Like, maybe it's time I go back. Maybe I can do something more with the Spanish thing. And so I went to go. I won a grant to be able to fund the thing, and was going to go do some community service. Um, Went down to Argentina again. Stayed with one of the families that I really had, just bonded with, and gotten to know really well. And at the end of that trip, I came back to Nashville saying, "Well, I have to be anywhere but here."
Wow.
So it was a complete 360 in how I had, or 180, I should say, and how I had been, considering life. And I'm not really sure what it was, but I just realized that,
You there? You're kind of frozen. Evan, can you hear me? Can you hear me,
hey,
sir?
yeah, you with me?
Okay. Yeah, yes, sir. I hear you now. We had a
Apologies
little
for that.
freeze there for a minute. Oh, no
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. So
Um,
where do you lose me?
Last I heard, you had done a 180. You were like, I got to be anywhere but here. You weren't quite sure what it was, but it was just like kind of a new door, new perspective on
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. So that's what happened. And I essentially said, why not just leap to something else? And so from there it was to Spain, went to Spain while I was in Spain. So I lived in Madrid for 6 months. And while I was there, I kind of said, why stop with Spanish? And so then it was French, and found out a way to go to France, finished up university in France, and then actually got a job over there as well. And so,
So let me ask. So this whole time you're still studying. Are you studying music in school? You were you were Nashville, Argentina, France, or Spain, Madrid, and now you're in
mhm.
France. The whole time you're studying music.
Yeah, kind of more music business,
Okay.
stuff to just get involved in the industry, but I was doing more like legal stuff. So it was, copyright law, that sort of thing. I
Oh, okay.
wasn't like a
Okay.
music student, although
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
brush shoulders with many of them, of course.
Oh, yeah.
But
I'm sure.
anyways, so yeah, I found out other ways to finish up my degree that weren't totally music related, but would give me what I needed to go and just get the degree and wrap up. So, anyways, did that, and yeah, then got a job in France for a bit, lived over there, and basically it's just been kind of leapfrog. So there's a little bit of time back and forth between France and the U.S., and then it was back to the UK, or to the UK, not back to the UK. And then it was actually while I was in France previously, though, that I had met my wife. So she had been introduced to me by an Italian coworker,
Okay.
and we got in touch there. And then, we dated during my time in London. And then I moved to Italy about 3 years ago, and we got married.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. That's a quite an accomplishment to find a good wife and to settle down. And I hear little children in the background, which is such a beautiful sound. So
Yeah.
congratulations on the young family, sir. What a
Thank you.
marvelous thing.
Thank you. I
I
believe he is
got
slamming the toilet down. The toilet lid.
that's good. If you're okay with that, I'm okay with it. That's great. Let me ask you, man. I feel like I'm like, I don't know, 20 years behind you on like my arc of life as far as my perspective on the world. Um, what was it that just drew you to these other places, outside of the US? Was there like, did you have like a disillusionment with the US, or that we're on the wrong track and you saw something in these other places? Or was it just that you loved learning about other culture? How did that work?
Yeah, I think fundamentally with language, it was just because of the worlds that it opens up.
Yeah.
I like to think I have, uh, I don't know how to say it. I mean, my imagination is active, I should say, and it got put on overdrive when I get to discover worlds with new languages. I think that was, to me as a teenager, that was the sort of thing that really
Okay.
kick-started like, oh wow, that's just so beautiful. You can step into different worlds, different places,
The
different things
adventure.
like this. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
cool. And then in college, so I don't know like what it was exactly, but obviously, in university, like you didn't realize it at the time because you're saying, "Oh, this is just normal." Then you look back on it and you say, "Oh, my lit teacher was a communist, like an avowed communist," and you
Right.
miss some of that. And so I'm sure that part of it was influenced too by just like, "Oh, it is an inherent good to go and have these experiences and do things in different cultures." And which is interesting because I've since kind of like flipped on that. It isn't to say like, oh, it's not a good thing to go and travel, but I think that it's actually way overhyped, and it's something that like isn't as cracked up as it's typically intended to be. And
Yeah.
so, anyways, all that said, though, I've lost the thread slightly. But what is it that made me want to go abroad?
Yeah.
I think it was just an interest in other cultures, seeing the way that different people do things, like having different filters through which you can see the world. I think that was really interesting. That plays in the imagination, but also just thinking like, oh,
Yeah.
here's this idea that I always thought was this way, but there are other ways of going about it as well.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
also kind of what that morphed into later on, especially from a faith perspective, I suppose, is that you also find like what are the things that are consistent across different cultures, or in Western culture, I should say at the very least, and you
Yeah.
start to pick up on those things. So you're finding like both a really nice true diversity, but also just a fundamental thing of like, oh, this
Right.
is how these are like more eternal truths that we're getting at here.
Yeah, definitely. That's beautiful. That's awesome. Um, Man, I would love to spend an entire day talking to you about. You thought travel was kind of like this door, and now you're kind of saying it's overhyped. Because I also started traveling maybe 10 years ago abroad, and it kind of really like just opened my eyes to some things in my mind, and I was like, there are definitely different ways of doing life, and um, a lot of things that I grew up believing are absolutely true, but there's also so much more to explore and to appreciate in different ways, just to enjoy life and to do things. But I've always wondered, like I've told my wife in retirement, like I want to go spend like months in less like one location and try to become a local as much as possible, just to really um, understand the place and the people, and to know what it's like to really be there. And you've done that. So, but I always wonder, every place you see, you're kind of seeing as a tourist, and you're not really understanding the full, what it's really like to be a local. You talked about going to the trash and having to like separate out your Dyson, whatever, whatever. I
Yeah.
don't want to derail us here, but that's the kind of stuff that I really would love to get into. But let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your life's work so far. So I learned about you through Culture Critic, now the Culturist. And I was like, okay, who's this Evan Amato guy? And then I see something about Rewire the West, and I check out your website, and I'm like, oh man, this guy, he's into classical music. I love classical music, and you're talking about classical literature and things which I haven't really delved deeply into. But all these other things, and then I find your YouTube page, and you've got some fantastic people. If you have not checked out Evan Amato on YouTube, after the stream, check him out. He's got a fantastic interview with Edward Habsburg, which maybe we'll show a little bit later, but all kinds of wonderful tidbits, wonderfully produced, great content. You got to check it out. But besides Rewire the West and working with Culture Critic, the Culturist, you also have Invictus with James, Western Exile, which he's another great account on X. Then I see you've got Imperium Coffee, and I don't even know, like, you've got 10 other side businesses that I haven't even discovered yet, maybe. But can you talk us through some of your endeavors? What are you trying to do? Where are you headed? And like, how did this come to be? Whatever you want to share from that.
Yeah, well, you're very kind with all that stuff. It's definitely at times been more than I can juggle, but I've fortunately come into a better rhythm with it. The more you do it, the more you kind of figure out how to balance all this stuff.
Yeah.
But anyways, to start out, I mean, I've always known that I would be an entrepreneur from like as early as I can remember. I knew that whatever I did wouldn't be an orthodox career, for lack of a better word. Like, it just wouldn't be the standard, like, go and find a good company, work for, that sort of thing. And this, not to say by any means that there's anything wrong with that. I think there's a lot good with that. But I just knew that that wasn't going to be my path. And so I thought, it could be anything. For at the beginning, it was more creative. Is it writing? Is it photography? Is it music? Is it, what is it? And then it kind of became more entrepreneurial as it went on. And so more like proper businesses. And so anyways, I, have been doing this for the better part of for the past 4 years, I suppose, because I actually said, when I said, I'm going to dedicate a sufficient amount of time to doing this thing, like trying to make money online, and I'm just going to see if it works. And I said, I'm going to start something and I'm going to give it 5 years. And probably however I end up is not going to be at all how I started out, but that's okay. I'm just going to give it 5 years. And if I haven't done something by the end of those 5 years, I'll throw in the towel and I'll just, I'll be a big boy and I'll go get a real job. Okay. So I'm happy to report that actually, as of this past April, that was the 4-year anniversary of me saying, okay, I'm going to do this thing. So we're now in the 5th year. And at this point, it's more than sustaining itself. And
Awesome.
I'm just fortunate. I pinch myself consistently over this thing, because it's not like I did anything really in particular to deserve it. It's just I've been graced with it in many ways, and I'm I just try to put in my best and make sure that I'm responsible for things I need to be responsible for. And again, growing it like with a family, these different projects and side businesses and whatnot. It's like, how can I trim the fat and focus more on what matters also? Because like one of the biggest things when I got married was I just realized, okay, look, I could do like all these different things, but that's not going to be fruitful to a long-term relationship. It's not going to be what's actually best for my family. And so I need to figure out the things that I can do that are sustainable and that do allow us to make money, and, take chances and risks and hustle, do monk mode where necessary, but make sure that it's all actually like balanced in a bigger picture. So a lot of like the past 3 years has been, and really like the past year and a half in particular, has been scaling back and focusing more on like, what's the bread and butter, and focusing on that. And actually, the more that I do that, the more it becomes profitable. Like the better it gets, the more I can kind of say no to other opportunities and just double down on what I do well, the better it becomes. And so that's a really, that's just where I am right now with it. And I'll shut up because I have rambled enough on that answer.
No, that's great. Well, let me ask a little bit more on that topic. So are those all still ongoing projects, or are there any that I missed? Or is like Rewire the West, was that like you're starting and now you've moved on to like writing for the Culturist and focusing on Invictus? And then the Imperium Coffee, is that just kind of like self-sustaining? It doesn't really require too much from you.
Yeah, so for all intents and purposes, Rewire the West was the first thing that I really started. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this SEO blog, kind of optimize it for that. To this day, I still get thousands of visits a month, and I haven't touched it in years. Like I haven't touched it in
Okay.
at least 2.5 years, 3 years. And I was doing that, and I was like, oh, let me go and do YouTube. And then I was doing YouTube. And it was through someone I met on YouTube who he said, hey, you need to get on X. And so I
Yeah.
said, like, I had literally never had Twitter before in my life, but I got on Twitter, wrote a thread, and it did over 1 million views. And I said, oh,
Wow.
okay, like
Your first
there's
one?
something to this. Yeah.
Wow.
For
That's
first one. I mean, it was
that's
crazy.
awesome.
And again, with all that, it just it was Rewire the West, and then I got in touch with Culture Critic, now the Culturist, and we decided to put our heads together and create something, which is the Culturist publication. I parallel to that was creating Imperium Coffee because I wanted to get out of all the digital stuff and have something that's actually rooted in the
Yeah.
ground that you can touch and smell and taste and all this stuff. And so I started doing that. And then Invictus, this other publication, I was like, oh, this would be a cool marketing idea for the coffee thing. And it'd be like cool, interesting content too. It's not like it's just marketing. It's actually something
Right.
that, people could find valuable. And so I started doing that by myself. And then I came across James, just met him through X. And I said, oh, he's a cool guy. Like, why don't we just do this together and turn it into something else? And so it's become its own thing, almost independent of Imperium. And so, yeah, really, like right now, I didn't close Rewire the West per se, but it doesn't really, I'm doing other stuff independent
Sure.
of it. So I just, my main publications are the Culturist, Invictus, and then running Imperium Coffee.
Great, man. Well, those are fantastic endeavors, and hats off to you for such successes. I especially enjoy the live stream you do with James each Thursday. It's such interesting content, and I know it trails into then your writings for Invictus, your articles. So that's awesome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to do it with him.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. It seems like your all of your efforts are geared towards almost like righting the ship. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like, when did you become aware of something's wrong with Western civilization, and how did you set out like, this is where my effort should go to help fix the situation? It really does seem like you're on like a mission. Am I wrong?
Well, I think a large part of that came, I can pinpoint it to a specific moment. And with a lot of these things, I don't think it's fair to do that because your own thought and understanding things evolves in ways that you're not even aware of. But I know that for me, when COVID happened, so I was in France at the time and stayed there for a while during the lockdown. And then it just became horrendous. And I was like, man, I can't do this. And so I got back to the States. And it was while I was there. So there's COVID going on. There was the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter stuff. There was the election. I was just like, man, this is a ton. Like, I just felt super overwhelmed. And I went up into my attic and said, I'm going to just find a book to read. And I found Much Ado About Nothing by Shakespeare. I said, I'm going to read this play. And I read the play and I completely fell in love with it and just thought it was the most joyful, witty, fun, just incredible thing that I had read in a very, very long time. And it was somewhat of a wake-up call. I wouldn't say it was the first time I had discovered that sort of thing, because I have always been into literature and whatnot. But it was certainly a wake-up call of like, oh man, this has been such an oasis from the madness of the world. And there's definitely something here. And so that was what prompted a large part of me diving into this and doing Rewire the West. So like, oh, I know what I want to do now. That energy that I had previously, I decided, now I'm going to run it into this thing, Rewire the West. And this is what I'm going to start doing here. And so that was really a watershed moment for me where I just realized the power that these things have. And so I said, yeah, I want to talk to others about this. And kind of as I was doing that on that journey, I was both going back to things that I had experienced earlier, and earlier on, whether those be works of literature or music or what have you. It was both rediscovering those, but then also discovering new things in the process. So it was while I was while I was in London and I was having a conversation with a guy about Venetian history. And for whatever reason, Venetian history comes up, and it had began with Dostoevsky. We had begun talking about his work, and because I was revisiting some of his stuff, and then we got onto this conversation. We ended up talking about Venetian history. We're big into this, and then all of a sudden, he tells me about opera, and he's like, "Oh, dude, have you been?" And I said, "No." You would love this, and he was right. I did love it, and so, but discovering new things. So I was a complete neophyte, and then just totally spent, months, dude. It was bad actually. If you look at probably like my spending, there were weeks where I was like, I have £7 to my name this week because I spent the rest on opera tickets. I just waited until payday, but it was totally worth it. It was absolutely worth it, and got to go to like so many operas and concerts and ballets and all this stuff, and just like fell in love with more and more things and new things. And so it's kind of been, in the process of doing it, you become better at it and you discover things that you never would have known. So even just the stuff with James, and Invictus and the streams that we do, it's like he has been someone who we connected because I said, "Hey, I want to talk about this. You seem like a good guy to talk about it with." And then the more that we had conversations, the more I'm like, "Oh, you're actually turning me on to great stuff as well. Great things to discover of my own, and like prompting provocative thoughts and this sort of thing." And so he was really great. So many guys on X have been like that, actually, like whether it's getting into political philosophy. Athenian Stranger, he's another guy who like I really I need to tell him this more directly because I don't think I've, I always show him love, whenever we host a space together or whatnot. But he really is another one of those accounts that like just the stuff that he turned me on to, the rabbit holes he sent me down. That was wonderful. And so it's been the whole experience that I've had so far of being on X, just been like this, just meeting great guys who turn you on to great materials, and you go down those rabbit holes and you learn more and more. And so, and then you get to share that, you get to kind of mix it in with the stuff that you're naturally passionate about, and you get to share that with people again. So it's been really just a wonderful trip on all aspects there.
Oh, that's great. That's incredible. Folks, let me let you know, if you have any questions for Sir Evan Amato, feel free to drop them. You have to click on X, you have to click on the video, and then I think on a PC it'll be on the right hand side. If you're on your phone, it'll be down below where it says live chat. So please go ahead and ask those. Sometimes we have technical problems. If we see your question, we will read it, and if we don't read it, you might have to refresh your browser. But please ask your questions. But so let me ask you, Evan. With Western civilization, it's for myself at least, it seems easy to almost feel like, not that I want to throw in the towel, but it seems like we've went so far off the tracks, and trying to right the ship is such a task. And from what I'm hearing you, what you were just sharing, it sounds like you're kind of like you were kind of like waking up to these classics and to these things, and you're kind of sharing them with others, almost like waking up sleeping people. Because it's so easy in the United States to kind of just get in this grind of, I get up, I go to work, I come home, I eat TV, or I eat dinner and watch TV, I go to sleep, and you just get in this rhythm of just life. And it's easy to tune out the politics and to tune out things. So many people don't go to church anymore. They are having less children. There's all these kinds of then special interests that kind of rise that are kind of opposed to traditional Western values. And it's like, how do we reclaim those things? Do you have any ideas of like where we went wrong, or is this just kind of outside of your scope? And besides waking people to these, are there other paths that maybe aren't your ball game that you think are kind of valid or worthy to take? I know that was a lot of question there, but
Yeah. Well, the short answer is the French Revolution. I'll just leave that and won't elaborate. We've written about that a little bit on Invictus and hosted some spaces, but I think the French Revolution is actually very, very impactful, far more than people realize. And I remember even in
yeah.
high school, actually, I had a teacher who someone had asked, what are the effects of the French Revolution? And he said, it's too soon to tell.
Well,
And it's a
wow.
really phenomenal answer, actually. I got to give him credit.
Yeah.
But a longer answer, though, is I think that this is something that one of my spiritual directors told me. He said, Evan, you write about the West. Because one day I was feeling pretty bad, down about things. And he said, why, what happens in the West? It's like, I don't know. And he said, the sun goes down. He said, the sun sets. The sun always sets in the West. The sun is setting on the West. It's always setting in the West. And you have to understand that that's part of our culture. Like, things are always dying. The magic is always going out of Middle Earth. It's always leaving. There's something that is disappearing in the world. And that's just part of the aspect of Western culture. And to a similar degree, I was talking to someone else about this, about, why, let's say this, Jesus was crucified, but if you're Christian, you believe he also rose from the dead. So why is it that in most churches you have a crucifix and not, Jesus atop the tomb triumphant? And part of it, not the whole reason, but part of it's because God has always been crucified. And so these two ideas, the fact that the sun is always setting on the west and the fact that God has always been crucified, I think, at least for me, for some others that can lead to despair perhaps. But for me, it's really nice because you just understand that this is just the nature of things. So you're not seeing it as something bad. Let me put it that way. Like, it's not just, we live in an awful time. It's like, no, there's always been awful things. There's always been this. And some people will say, like, this is where I think some people just love to complain. And they'll say, no, but this is like uniquely bad. It's uniquely bad. And in some ways they're not wrong. But also, like, things have always been uniquely bad. Things are going to be uniquely bad in the future as well. And so what you cannot do is you cannot despair. You cannot black pill, as we like to say. No black pilling allowed. You cannot do that. You just have to understand that. Go ahead.
No, not to cut you off. I think what we need to keep in mind is if we take the attitude that it's always been bad, so I'm just going to sit back and eat my popcorn and not care, then it maybe really will get worse than ever. It's almost like we need to have a sense of urgency that the battle is never over. It is spiritual warfare. We battle not against flesh and blood, right, but against spiritual powers. We always need to fight the fight, but don't fall into despair. We always need to remember that our hope is in Jesus Christ, that he did conquer the tomb, and we know how the story ends, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'll come to that, because it's not just like, everything has always sucked, so just, give up.
Yeah.
It's just understanding that everything has always been bad. And, and, like, your duty is to become a saint despite it. And in fact, actually, by becoming more of yourself, more of an individual, more, in the saintly way, like, God has put you in a specific situation. He's given you certain skills. He's endowed you with certain gifts, put you in a particular time, in a particular place for a reason. And your job is just to fight the battle. Your job isn't to win. Your job is just to do what you ought to do. It's to do your duty and to do it to the best of your ability. And that's all. Like, that's all that's required of you. And so that's why I say, like, I find this really, really comforting in a way. And it's something that Tolkien understood phenomenally. Like, he mentions history just being one long string of defeat. Like, every time you look at every period in history, it looks like in some way the good guys are losing. The good guys have lost. The good guys have been conquered. But yet you still go and you do what you ought to do. And it's like, the last stand at the gates of Mordor. It's when Aragorn goes out and is leading what everyone understands to be basically just a suicide mission, just to buy time for someone else. But it's like, that's what you ought to do. If you see any victory in your life, then great. Like, that is a blessing. But the reason maybe what I'm saying like sounds so far on the other side of the spectrum is just because I think that as Americans, certainly it's easy to come at things from the perspective of like, oh, I deserve a good life. I deserve this. I deserve, whether it's prosperity, whether it's peace, whether it's this, whether it's that, like that's the expectation. And actually just to flip it on your head and say, no, like the expectation is actually something far worse. And only by the grace of God is anything better. And just, do your duty,
Right.
show up where you need to show up and embrace the difficulty, because that's part of it. And it's not a bug. It's just a feature. Like I remember doing this with entrepreneurship too, where one day I was so like, I had just lost my mind over something I was doing that I just couldn't get, like a tech thing that I couldn't get figured out. And I talked to someone about it, like completely distraught. Oh, this is light career ending basically. And
Yeah.
she was just like, yeah, so what? So you're doing what an entrepreneur does. I was like, oh, huh, okay. And that really, she just framed it as like, yeah, this is part of the process. Like there's going to be days that you're just beyond infuriated and that you see no end in sight. And that's okay. Just accept that. And so that sort of acceptance has been really great. Partner with the fact that, as you said, if you're Christian, you believe that you ultimately win. And so it doesn't matter. Like you have the last laugh regardless. So just do what you're called to do. Like that's actually a thing. You're called. It's like you're Aragorn leading this charge and get some Mordor. Except you actually know that even if you die, you still win later on. So you literally have nothing to lose. So those two things coupled have been a great source of encouragement in my life, despite how potentially pessimistic they seem on the surface. I think it gives you the energy just to be like, yeah, look, this is what we have to do.
That's great. That is such a great perspective for all of us to have. Beautifully said. Let me ask, growing up in the United States and now you're in Italy, as far as kind of the spiritual climate of the people, do you see, are they fairly similar? Are the Italian youth in the same place, similar places as the Americans, or are they embracing Catholicism and Christianity? How are things going?
Yeah, not at all is the the short answer.
Okay.
So America, forget practicing. Okay. But I'll say this, and it's something I've said for a long time, is that America is an inherently religious nation. And by religious, I means that people have a religious fervor to them that even if they're not Christian or of any practicing religion, they bring that to the table. So whether they're like vegans or, abortion activists or feminists or anti-fascist or like whatever it is, they bring a religious fervor with them to whatever it is that they even like exercise. In Europe, and I know that I can only speak of my experience in Western Europe, and even then, mainly Southern Western Europe, people are just less religious, and in that on like all spread of the spectrum. So even the stuff that they don't do it the same zeal, fanaticism, fervor, the way that people would do stuff in the States. So that's the first thing. And then the second part is like, what about actually organized religion? And for as bad as, Americans like to kind of portray it as, it's a night and day difference. I mean, at my parish here in Italy, if a baby cries at mass, it is my baby because there are no others. Like literally,
Wow.
I mean, it's the only one.
Yeah.
And you can't, I mean, I barely know anyone else my age who has any sort of faith. And so is practicing. And even the way in which people practice, and so this is a different thing too, is that even the way in which people practice is different. And now that isn't so much a bad thing, it's just a difficult thing, because even American Catholics, for example, express themselves in very Protestant ways. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's like actually it helps. But the way that people go about things, it's like very community based and all this stuff. And I mean, half of people just go to church, if you're being honest with themselves, like for the community, you know. And if you're Protestant, it's like, oh, got to find a church, got to find my community. If you're Catholic, a little less so, but like still, a large part of the reason you're there is for the community. Here, there's like none of that, and even the times that there is something, it's funny because just the way that they do it's totally different. And so, from an American perspective, it feels very like it just falls short of what you would need to be like filled up in a way that you would in the States. So all that said, very, very different. Of course, there are, you know, so very select communities in different places as there are everywhere. But on the whole, I mean, Italy too, it's, you know, Catholicism is embedded in the culture, and you see this in some ways. But in terms of people who are actually practicing, I mean, it's slim to none.
Wow, that's that's discouraging. I was hoping to hear the opposite. Well, it is what it is. We'll pray and we'll do what we can. We've got about 10 minutes left here, folks. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section there. I do want to move on to kind of an intro to the classics for those that haven't done so. But before we go, let me ask one more thing about kind of society and the direction of things. And I don't know how much you keep up on, you know, USA culture. I have a 21-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old daughter, so I very much, you know, hear this every day, kind of that age group perspective. It's like in the United States, the women have surpassed the men in education, in effort, in just like being, I would say, like mature in life at that age. Like when I was that age, you know, I'm going to school. I'm getting a job. I'm finding my wife. I'm going to start my family. I'm getting a house. I was just like chomping at the bit to be an adult and to move forward. And it's like now it's like the men in the U.S. are like 30 before that even like crosses their radar, and they're fine, you know, like living at home. Or there's like this whole trend. My daughters are trying to like find suitable spouses, but it's like there's these guys that talk this game like we're all about the traditional lifestyle. We want a trad wife, and we're going to be an entrepreneur. And they call them like the gym bros or the podcast bros. They like are all about like going to the gym or watching Joe Rogan, all these podcasters talk about all these like successful things, but they like stop at just watching it. They don't actually follow through. And so it's like, but then they expect the woman to kind of hold up their end of the bargain. So it's like, I don't know. I pray every day for my daughters. Okay. What's it like with the youth, the other places that you've been? Are they all kind of on a similar trajectory, or is it like chivalry and masculinity and being a man like alive and well in Italy or France, Spain?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the answer is a bit like it was for the past one, which is that it's far worse here. It's far worse.
You're killing me, man.
Actually, it's really sad because I go out with my wife all the time, and I point out this like crazy phenomenon that there are so many attractive Italian women with like guys who you're like, why the hell is she with him? And it would be one thing if it like happened once or twice. But my wife and I will see it in public all the time. We just point it out. Yeah. And basically what we've come to is that like the selection of Italian men is just so piss poor that the women just lower their standards. And it is really sad because like, yeah, it's not, I mean, people don't even get married here. They'll have kids. They call ragazzi is like the way for what you would call a group like boys and girls, but it's what you call them in high school. But that term is still applied to like people in their mid 30s.
Mm.
And and they'll say that to, oh, ciao ragazzi. It's like, you're 38, stop.
Wow.
Like, it's not even you
Yeah.
saying that. It's you're calling someone who's 38 that word.
Yeah.
And so it's a totally different term of how people do that. But that said, so obviously it's not just, oh, it's America, but worse. There are different cultural elements that differ. So gender roles are much more quote unquote traditional here. Like, women like to cook and they like to be feminine on the whole, broadly speaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't,
Sure.
just diagnose 60 million people in Italy, but like,
Right.
broadly speaking, it's kind of more like, okay, yeah, women are more feminine, like to be present as like typically feminine,
Hmm.
and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's just unfortunately, it's just like a very different culture. And what you've seen, and what makes me sad, is that a lot of the times you do get the impression like people just they feel like they have to lower their standards
Yeah.
because they look around them and they're just like, oh, this is it. And I've talked to people too, and they're just like, yeah, I mean, I felt like I had to do this or I wouldn't be liked, or that I'd never get with anyone because of
Right.
XYZ and all this stuff. And it's really sad. And they have this perspective because ultimately there's a lack of faith. So they're coming at it from a very specific angle. And I think Pope Leo the 14th actually spoke about this recently. He was talking about how one of the things that we have to do is we have to evangelize, because to fail to do so, it leads to secular situations that leave people without hope. It just leads them to despair. And that's a lot of what I've genuinely seen, is that people don't even think like, oh, there's another way to do things. It's a complete, like, they're incapable of even imagining it because it's been so relegated to the corners of society. And so part of what you have to do, like, you just have to, again, live by example, do what you can. Like, every time I'll go out, people won't even call my wife my wife. They'll just call her, oh, you're fidanzata. Like, you're, what they
Wow.
translates literally as like fiance, but it doesn't even mean that you've proposed. It just means that you've been with this person for a while, and you can be for someone for
Yeah.
like 20 years and they're
Yeah.
still your fidanzata. And so they'll say, oh, is your fidanzata whatever? I'm like, no, my wife. And I like,
Yeah.
she's my wife. And I'll always, double down on that point. And so
Right.
you do what you can, but yeah, look, the only thing I'd say about the American side of things, though, as a fun bit of hope, is like, the people who I know who are actually the most trad, like, who are actually the most kind of traditional relationship, let's say that, they're people who don't look like it. So I think there's a lot of people who mistake the outward aesthetic of something for the inward disposition.
Yeah.
And to that point, like I've said, the people I know personally who have traditional relationships, there are people who you maybe wouldn't ever guess that if they, based on their social media, or based on the pictures they take or the stuff they wear, or, the way that they talk to each other, like, you wouldn't see
Yeah.
that. But it's more about the spirit of it than it is about the aesthetic of things. And so it's kind of,
Yeah.
trying to regain what is that actually, and what is that spirit.
Yeah. That makes sense. Man, that's man, it's hard to not be depressed. I would love to do an entire stream just talking about, you know, why are we here? How do we get here? And just the kind of the spirit of the world, the mindset of the world. But that's a whole nother show. But
Well, David, I
we have
have to
a
say too, like, part of my just telling you like it is, in terms of, Italy and Europe in comparison to the U.S., isn't
yeah.
just to be all negative about it, but it's really to be like,
No.
in the U.S. there's still great opportunity, and people need
Yeah,
to take
yeah, yeah,
advantage of it, because part of what I see is, like, when I see people blackpilling on Twitter or whatever, I'm just like, dude, you don't even know how good you have it.
yeah,
Stop it. And that's why despair is fundamentally it's such an awful sin, because it takes you out of the game before you even try to compete.
yeah,
You don't even bother fighting. And so
yeah,
it's the devil's greatest trick is he doesn't even have to put up with you if he just
yeah.
has you decide that you don't want to fight. Don't despair.
Well,
Things are better than you think.
Right. When my wife and I are talking about the situation, and our daughters and stuff, my wife's like, "Oh, just everybody, they're just, everybody's doing this or that is just so sad." And I would just say, "Well, listen, our daughters don't need the entirety of the male population. They just each need one man. There's one good man out there,
Yeah.
that they, so yeah, definitely can't lose hope." Well, we have our first comment from Raphael Barbary, and he is going to be a guest very soon on our live stream.
Lovely.
So, hey, Rafe, I'm glad you're tuning in here. He's saying, for Evan, how would you get started on the classics of literature for someone who has some knowledge but is struggling to expand on it? And this is the perfect segue because that's exactly where we were headed.
Yeah, perfect. Excuse me. Raphael, great to see you, my friend. Look, I think the answer to this question is it's multiple. I'll try to be brief. Like, just go to some of the cornerstones of classic literature, stuff that you've heard people talk about. Okay, it doesn't even have to be scientific. Like, you can go and you can get certain guys. They have their list of like what are the classics, what are this, but just go to the things that you've heard of and that you know. Like, you've heard of the Iliad, you've heard of the Odyssey, maybe you've heard of the Aeneid, maybe you've heard of Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, like these things, and go and discover them for yourselves. Just pick them up and read. This is one of the things that I got into. Actually, like, I basically went through a parallel of like exploring the classics of literature when I was 16 and got into the Beatles. So it was something that like I had grown up and I had heard, oh, the Beatles this, the Beatles that, the Beatles this, the Beatles that. I said, I've heard so much darn stuff about them, and occasionally you'll hear something on the radio. Let me just go get their albums. And so I got every single album and I listened to it through and, listen to it again and get to know their stuff. And then that's how you do it. And then in the process of doing that, you get exposed to other stuff as well. So it's the same thing with classic literature. Like, what are the big works? Maybe it's the Divine Comedy. Maybe it's the Count of Monte Cristo. Maybe it's again the Iliad. Like, just pick up one of those works, read it, and see what happens. I guarantee that just by taking that first step, it'll open up other doors to you, and that's what I got to do.
Great advice. And Bookworm Bean adds he could join Humble Flow's the Culturist Book Club, which they definitely recommend some titles. I've seen that out there on X. Yeah. So that's a good advice. Thank you for that. All right, before I go to the next comment, you brought up the Beatles and all of their albums. Which is the best, Sir Evan Amato?
The best is hard to say. I mean, I really enjoy Revolver. Sgt. Pepper's too. Yeah. Every once in a while, it's like you got an itch, you got to scratch that Sgt. Pepper's. Abbey Road, though, is probably my favorite. I know that's such like everyone knows Abbey Road, or everyone's heard of it at least, but it actually is a phenomenal record.
The flow of the album, like classical music, is just beautiful.
Well, especially towards the back end, like once they start flowing into each other.
Right.
That's phenomenal.
Exactly. Yeah. It's awesome. All right. We got a comment here from Chops Math. How would you inspire one of those stuck in mediocrity young men? Not quite.
Great question.
I'm not reading that right. Yeah.
Yeah. Really good question. To say like stock, it's so hard to answer that because it depends on where that person is. Like, what are they stuck with, this sort of thing. But I think, I could talk about how to prevent it, which I think has something to do with also getting someone unstuck. So what I would say in terms of preventing it is kids, like, I remember this because I didn't mention this at all, but like I spent some time in kids education and with middle schoolers as well. And so what I saw is like these kids would walk into the classroom and their role models, they would be watching YouTube videos of other people playing video games. Right. Like, it got to the point where they're not even playing the video games themselves. They're just watching others play video games.
Yeah.
And those were their role models. And I was saying, like, there are guys who are way, way, way cooler than this. Like, what in the world? But they've never heard of them, or they've just heard names in a textbook, but they've never had that, like, become made real to them and seen how, oh, actually this guy was like a complete badass and a really cool dude. And so to prevent this sort of thing, I think a major part of the process is just exposing people to these folks as they grow up. And this is what I love about the Catholic faith too, is that we have the whole communion of saints. I mean, you just have tons and tons of people, whether they were paupers, whether they were princes, it doesn't matter. Like, people have lived out saintly lives in any and all contexts that you could think of. And some of them did crazy things, crazy awesome things. You know, there's a bunch of like badasses in there. And so there's that, but then there's also like just the men of history. And C.S. Lewis talks about this. He says, before you can make a young man a good Christian, you have to first make him a good pagan. And this sentiment underscores some of what I just outlined, which is that you have to cultivate this sort of zeal and this quest for greatness, because it's better, in fact, to err on the side of even like sinful pride and ego, that's like what's driving accomplishment. It's better to aim on that, because you can at least take that impulse and then refine it and domesticate it into something that is productive for society too, and that's not just self-serving. But you have to have that impulse. And so when Chops Math is talking about someone stuck in mediocrity, that to me, I understand that as not even having the impulse in the first place, not even being like, oh yeah, I could do stuff. And so it's just saying like, no, there are crazy great things that you could do. And perhaps right now, you know, for young kids now, perhaps for people who are like really stuck, I wouldn't recommend this for everyone, but for someone who's really stuck, maybe it's just getting them out of the system completely. And by that, I mean, like, hey, forget about college. Like, don't do, like, go actually do something crazy, you know, go hitchhike across a foreign country, or go like start a band and try to make something work. But you know, I'm not going to diagnose anything without actually knowing it, but just saying like go do, you know, because, okay, you can't just, you know, hop on a ship from Spain and go to the New World. You know, you can't just do this, but you actually can do some other things. Like, you can even just sign up for the military. I'm not saying that that's the path you want to go to, but you can literally just like sign up for the military, learn how to use weapons, learn how to jump out of planes. Like, that's not going to hurt you, you know? And some of the best guys that I knew in university were guys on the GI Bill, who they were, you know, kind of directionless as a youth. They went to the military for 10 years and then they come back and they're like, huh, I know exactly what I want to do. I'm way more mature. This is awesome. And they have really like direction that's been given to them. So again, it matters on, like, depends on so many different things. If we're talking about someone's son, you know, if I don't know someone, I can't give any sort of advice. But I think in the first place, like, again, I'll pull from C.S. Lewis, just if you want to make a good Christian of someone, make a good pagan first. And I think what he means by that pagan thing is just this sense of like, you have to have a zeal for life. You have to have this urging to do something great, to make something happen, to exert your will over the world. And get that first. And then once you get it, all right, now we can go about the process of like steering that into productive and healthy avenues. But we have to have that impulse in the first place.
That's great advice. I talked earlier how it's kind of easy just to kind of get into this mundane rhythm of life where all you do is just get up and go do your thing, whether it's school or work, and you just come home and it's just, you kind of like lose the sense of wonder. And I think that's partially what you're talking about. You know, instead of being this little fish in a little you know, bowl in a room, like, introduce them to the larger ocean. Like, there's so much out there to experience and be inspired by, to light a fire within them. And since my daughters were little, you know, anything that I'm interested in, I'm trying to like introduce to them. And yeah, you're speaking above them, but that's like calling them up to more maturity and installing that like wonder and discovery and fire within them. And like you said, today it's so easy to do so many things that people for millennia have not been able to do. We could do it tomorrow if we really want to. So that's great advice, Evan. Thank you for that. All right. Well, I know we're drawing down here to the end. Time for any last minute questions, if anybody has any. Let me ask you. I know you're a big fan of classical music, as I am. Who's your favorite composer? I know you're into opera. Let's keep opera Separate.
Ah.
Okay. Just all right. Uh, give me a couple favorite composers. What do you like to listen to?
Yeah, man. Well, today I was listening to a ton of Wagner all morning and early
Okay.
afternoon. Was listening to a ton of him, of course,
Yeah.
opera. Yeah, I mean, I really do. I really do love opera for so many reasons, and the composition that goes into it is really unique, and it's what part of makes people, my favorite composers. But leaving that aside, Tchaikovsky's great. Any music that makes a good ballet is always something
Yeah.
to come back to. He, of course, has great ballets. Um, I mean, you can't go wrong with Beethoven or Mozart. Obviously, these are obvious things, but I'm
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
them because I think that, like the Beatles, people take them for
Yeah.
granted. Like Mozart, especially. You hear, okay, Beethoven's great, and you can listen to him and understand why. With Mozart, you might go through some of the stuff and it's like, I don't really get it in the same way. But one of the things that changed my mind so much about Mozart that had me like actually appreciate and fall in love with him is someone said, we listen to Mozart with ears tuned by Beethoven.
Mm.
And it's true because Beethoven, with his romantic sensibilities and this big bombast and emotion,
Yeah.
he tunes the way that we receive music. Like our ears are accustomed to that. But Mozart was writing in a totally different way. He's
Right.
writing in a way that allows you to actually. So Beethoven composes in a way that tells you how to feel. He says, "Hey, here's his emotion. Feel this," and he thrusts it in your face. What Mozart does is he says more so like, "Here's a piece. You bring yourself to it." And there are tons of pieces like this. Not all of them, but a lot of Mozart you can listen to, and if you think of like how could this play out in a movie score, if there was something like just what would this look like as background music to scenes in a movie, and you can come up with like drastically different scenes for the same piece of music. So maybe it's someone drinking, having coffee. Maybe it's someone driving in the rain on a dark, stormy night with the rain coming down hard against the windshield. Maybe it's someone like walking through the city with the clouds parting and the sun coming down. Like it could be very opposite things, but Mozart allows you to bring this to the table. And I mean, he just does it to bring it back to opera, like the Marriage of Figaro. He does not put a note wrong for the entire 3.5 hours. Like he does not put a note wrong. It's crazy. You go back and listen to it, it's like he's actually amazing. And for
Yeah.
as overrated as people might think Mozart is, it's the same with Shakespeare. Like he's not overrated, he's underrated. You've heard his name
Yeah.
a million times, so you think he's
For a
overrated.
reason. Yeah.
But if you spend time with his music, he's actually incredible. Incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, a bunch of Rachmaninoff. His piano concertos
Yes.
are phenomenal.
Yeah.
I like number 2, piano concerto number 2. It's very popular. His third as well. The second's supposedly more popular than the third, but I can't get enough of the third. So Rock 3, Rachmaninoff third piano concerto. I mean, that's phenomenal to get into music. But yeah, all this sort of thing. It's a great.
What do you
place.
think of? I really I enjoy the class. The guys we're talking about, and J.S. Bach, his Brandenburg concertos. What about Maurice Ravel, Claude
Mhm.
Debussy, Dmitri Shostakovich?
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
these are kind of all more recent, but I really enjoy.
Shostakovich, I enjoy quite a bit. The
Yeah.
other two who you mentioned, it depends on the composition. It depends
Mhm.
on because they can get a bit like too. I don't know. It just they can kind of lose track and just get a bit too avant garde, I suppose, for my taste. But obviously, there's stuff that's popular. Is popular for a reason, and so on the whole, they're good composers. I just had another guy. I don't know why. Oh, Saint-Saëns. Camille.
Oh yeah, love
Oh,
him.
he's
Yep.
amazing.
His
So
organ
freaking good.
concerto or organ symphony,
Everything
Yes,
by
yeah,
him. Everything by
yeah,
him.
yeah.
It's so
Carnival of the
good.
Animals. Yeah.
Yes. Oh gosh, his stuff. I mean, he's like one of the fun fact about Carnival of the Animals. He refused to release it while he was alive
Right.
because he thought
Right.
it was such a he thought it was so like amateur or like childish, really.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
thought it was below his standing to release and be taken seriously. But he's like phenomenal. He's probably one of those guys in the French school that I really enjoy. So yeah,
yeah.
there's tons of guys like this. But like I said, like just start with the greats, and you'll find your way into other avenues soon enough. It happens very quickly.
Fantastic. Well, sir, I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody, if you're not already, please give Evan a follow. Check out Imperium Coffee, Invictus, obviously The Culturist, and Rewire the West. So, Evan, thanks again. I know you're off. Is it this week from Invictus, or was it just this last Thursday? I lose
Yeah,
track.
so it's gonna be we're gonna go stream this Thursday, and
Okay.
then
Yeah.
2 weeks from now I'll be off because I'll be hosting a retreat here in Bergamo.
Yes, yes. I someday hope to join you. You guys are throwing out there possibly Constantinople someday.
Yeah,
If that
yeah.
happens, I will be begging my wife
Constantinople,
for us to join.
Malta, we've got it all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be awesome. All right, well, sir, have a great day. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate it.